So when I was asked to talk about setting requirements, you obviously know that inside I was feeling a little bit like this guy, because I get excited about this stuff. I get this excited about it. And it's because we know from an industry's perspective what we want, and they are clarity in what we're going to require, accountability in actually the delivery process, and then making sure that everyone gets paid for what they do. That would be nice. However, our industry is a bit more like this, where it's a bit adversarial. It's a bit like, always, is it in the contract? And I'm only doing it if I'm going to get paid for it. And we always ask ourselves why. And I introduced a couple of these recently in a presentation, but they're so crazily mind-blowing that I just wanted to share them today because I think they really do sit nicely alongside this require topic. Can you believe that 90% of the data that we create in AEC is actually just unstructured? Well, maybe we can believe that. But this 96% of that data is actually unused. So let's take one moment. Everything we create, 96% of it, nobody ever uses. And I think that a lot of that is to do with the fact that it's not structured, because structured data would actually be more likely to be used in downstream processes. And it was such a big topic and a big set of data that I thought creating an AI slide as well and slipping it in there would be worthwhile. So, okay, we asked the 5 whys when we look at lean processes. And one of the key things that I see is that the information management, so defining requirements, has been really unstructured, and we've been defining them in spreadsheets. And when we share information, we work in silos and we throw it over the wall and we expect the next person to just pick it up and take it on from there. And in my experience, so my background is civil engineering and construction, and I would create these perfect BIM execution plans in Word documents, many hundreds of pages long, and spend hours over them. But it was unstructured data and nobody really cared about them. And my information requirements were defined in unstructured forms as well, in spreadsheets. And basically nobody really understood what I was asking for. And I would create 3D models historically, and it would look good, but people would be asking where the information is. And I really felt like this, pulling my hair out, having a pretty bad day a lot of the time because of unstructured requirements. And I didn't really know it at the time. And so my career in a nutshell is basically, drowning in drawings and nobody reading what I was creating. And my world was a bit confused, but I didn't really know why at that point in time. So how do we get here? What was the journey like? Well, we started with this concept of level of development, level of detail, level of definition. There's all different ways of describing what you need. And it was a good idea that we would want to define it in a structured way. So we started creating something that would try to set a baseline and have a way of defining exact requirements at certain stages throughout a project. And it was easy peasy, wasn't it? It was like there was just a number. It was like, do I want 100 or do I want 400 or 500? And people would just be like, this is easy to require something. So we would ask for 400, or if it's really needed to be very high, then we would get an LOD 600 request. And it wasn't so simple. So we realized that actually even just requiring it in a more structured way with a few numbers wasn't going to solve the problem. It was really open for interpretation just inconsistently across the board, and lots of misalignment, and really trying to quantify the actual information was very difficult. So we started in many other regards trying to define this in more clear ways and just basically adding structure to it. And we went through a whole bunch of different things, different aspects, whether it's estimating aspects or scheduling aspects or a whole bunch of different things. And we shifted from this detail concept towards development. There's a whole history there that really was supported by some fantastic graphical and also some definitions in requirements from an information perspective. So there's, again, a whole history there. But there was limitations there because of the way that we were asking for it still. It was in a specification that was linked to it, but it wasn't in a way that a machine could understand some of those requirements as well. And we missed a lot of other aspects. So level of accuracy became a thing because we started to measure, like whether it was a laser scan or building in a model. So it's measured accuracy and represented accuracy started becoming a thing. And it was not a simple scale when it came to information. It was actually that sometimes we needed maybe less geometry later on and more information, but how would we classify that in this sliding scale? How would we help people to understand it? And this is a pretty famous diagram Marzia put together that basically shows one standard started this, and it was misunderstood and misinterpreted and developed and adapted and adopted in different ways around the world, and it wasn't helping us as an industry. So we looked at what should we do, how should we do this in a much more structured way, in a way that people would be defining things that would then be used, and we understood that a lot of things needed to happen, and I'll share these slides, but in the interest of time, we saw this would be an optimal approach. And this is where buildingSMART, setting these structured definitions, these frameworks, is really the help and support that our industry has been missing for so long. And if we can use, and we'll be talking a lot about this all day, but if we can use a dictionary to define everything so everyone's talking the same language, if we can define it in a structured way that humans and machines can understand, and if we have a format that can then cycle through and actually automatically check those requirements, maybe we can do without the issue or topic reporting through something later on. I know that that's not realistic, but in a perfect world, wouldn't that be a great thing? We looked at, this is a presentation, buildingSMART, that we did that introduced how the synergies of these topics come together and how that is actually supported through ISO 19650 and level of information needs standards and openBIM and a whole bunch of other things. That's online to check out. And we've realized, and this is another AI image, very proud of that one, it's not optional anymore. This is actually something that we really should be doing on every single project and make sure that it's a standard that is not just defined, but also used and deployed across all projects in a way that everyone can use it. So it needs to be simplified as well. So we need some tools. And obviously, yeah, sorry, that's the advert there for Planoly as well. Okay, so we talked about the problem. We talked about the fact that we need some way of defining these information requirements. But how should we require them? Level of information need is a great framework that's basically trying to say, historically, we've been asking for too much or we're producing too much and it's been the wrong thing at the wrong time and not actually something that people are going to be able to use. So level of information need is trying to prevent delivery of too much information by defining it in a clear way, having a purpose for it, understanding how you can require something in this concept of a container, and making sure that the geometry, the properties, the documentation, those requirements are understood and can be shared in a contract and can be transferred through the workflow in both human and machine-readable ways. This framework has a lot of different aspects, and you can add to this, but basically we're looking at geometry, information, documentation, and there you can see the concepts of level of detail, concept of if that's reliable detail, then it's level of development, and also these accuracy, so what measured, represented, etc., accuracy, and also the information, and that's more about what the structured information requirements is that we can define. So what does it look like if we were to use that framework in a practical sense? Well, we would define the purpose, so we'd have along the top different milestones that represent the need, and then we would have a list of all of the required elements, or doesn't have to be elements, it could be tasks on a project. And then inside of your grid, you have a set of containers, and those containers are your requirements. Do you need it in 2D? Do you need it in 3D? How much geometry do you need? How much information do you need? Who is the responsible actor on that? Who should deliver it? Is there a handover between two trades? Maybe there's an earlier requirement for the architect to do the stairs in 2D. Later on, it's the structural engineer in 3D. Who is that responsibility, and where is the handover? These are incredibly important aspects. And then there's everything else that goes into this puzzle as well. So it's a great framework, and you can really dig into a lot more of what those requirements are. Checklists and attachments and notes and videos and a whole bunch of other things that can really help to define what is required at the right time by the right people. Okay, how does openBIM get involved in all of that with that level of information need framework? Well, it's about interoperability, and when we look at openBIM and the data exchange, well, we all know about this, and we've heard a lot about this already, but the two principles that I wanted to dig into a little bit more were the buildingSMART Data Dictionary and the Information Delivery Specification, because these are components that will help and support this process. I'm sure a lot of you are already aware what the buildingSMART Data Dictionary is, but imagine if you're new on here and you don't understand it. Imagine if it's like something that you could search for and everyone would get the same result. Maybe Google's not a good analogy here. So when you're classifying and when you're understanding, oh, this is supposed to be a GIF, and it should, so maybe here, this is where I will rotate into something else. So imagine if you are clicking and you're inserting a requirement, and as you type, you're actually bringing up all of the options, and it would bring in not just the name in the same way, but it also define what the information requirement is from what the entity is and what the code is, what the classification system is that you're using. And what if you could define that not just for all of the elements or all of the options for creating a 3D model, but also all about the information requirements from a responsibility perspective and whether it's a document that's required by a team at a certain point in time. And so what we're doing here is we're defining all of these requirements in a way that teams can understand in a grid, in a visual grid, and then we are able to, as we've defined this and have rules for these, and then understanding when these are required is also an important aspect, not just what has to happen and who has to do it, but also when, and what the conditions of satisfaction might be, being able to, and again here, we like AI, being able to click one button and have that as a starting point for not just information requirements, but also what does good look like. And once you've defined those things, those key aspects, you can then export it in a structured form, and that structured data could then be used in other machine-readable formats. And this is an XML form of the Information Delivery Specification that can then be used to automatically check the deliverables, and this is something that we will talk through in later steps today as well. So what if you had something that humans could read, could be part of somebody's contract, and then also be automatically checked so we wouldn't get a whole bunch of issues down the road. So that's this part. And you're exporting a really nicely structured set of information requirements so that you can then check it later on, and you can automate that. But information delivery specifications are great, but project needs are actually even more than what's required inside of an information delivery specification. So we would not just require properties on model objects or some form of verification rule and regular expressions to be able to define and validate that you're getting the right values, but you might need other things like pick lists and dates and costs and URLs and things like that are needed for lots of other parts of the puzzle. And that should be part of the information requirements that you're defining. You should also be able to define who is responsible. So for the team, is that the structural team? What milestone is that required? What the status is, who it's assigned to, and a whole bunch of other things. So these are all aspects that you, as a team, should be able to follow an openBIM and a workflow that is defined on a dictionary that everyone talks the same language. And wouldn't it be a great world if everyone was able to put that all into one workflow that made sense? Thank you very much. I really appreciate you.